Greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, Robert Meyer Burnett. I invite you to watch and listen to the Designing Hollywood podcast, brought to you by Martika Ibarra and the great, legendary Hollywood costume designer, Marilyn Vance. I am afforded the wonderful opportunity of co-hosting the show. If you are interested in the magic of Hollywood, the design of Hollywood, the clothes of Hollywood, watch the Designing Hollywood podcast, available wherever you get your podcasts from, or find the video version on the John Campea YouTube channel. That's right, the Designing Hollywood podcast. Why would you ever want to miss it? Especially if you love the movies.
Robservations with Robert Meyer Burnett.
Be on the lookout for True Noir, the Nathan Heller casebooks, brought to you by Imagination Connoisseurs Unlimited in association with Max Allen Collins, the writer behind Road to Perdition. It's a new audio drama starring Todd Stashwick, Captain Liam Shaw himself from Picard Season 3, in the role of Nathan Heller, Chicago PD officer turned private eye to the stars. Look for the crowdfunding campaign coming soon to bring you an 8-hour audio drama. Greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your master of fun and wonder, your viceroy of verisimilitude, your sommelier of sci-fi and cinema, your evangelist of the imagination and the, well, sometimes, who knows, maybe one day defined, existential Mr. Rogers. That's right, me, Robert Meyer Burnett. And I'm, of course, Robcasting right from the Robservatory at you imagination connoisseurs, you members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity community. This is Robservations episode number 908, marching to that 1,000th episode that, yes, will be 1,000 minutes long. That's right. We're going to do a 16-hour show for the 1,000th episode. I got interviews lined up, got a lot of great stuff happening. It's going to be a banger. You know what's not a banger? Movies. No one's banging. You get more banging than like in House of the Dragon. So, which, you know, I think a lot about this, actually. I think about eroticism in cinema. I think about growing up with the things that I liked. Certainly had a lot of sexuality, eroticism in them. And yes, I know the first thing a lot of you are going to say is, Rob, that's it was all from the male gaze. And it's true. It was. And we've seen, you know, over the recent years how, you know, let's face it, since the dawn of time, men are biologically compelled to do certain things. And a lot of that behavior isn't great. And it hasn't been great for thousands of years. And certainly it hasn't been great in the entertainment business, and we're seeing all of that laid bare. But that's not what I'm here to talk about. I am here to talk about the flip side of that. The idea that eroticism, that frisson that happens in your mind first, and then certainly when you meet somebody that you are simpatico with, that you vibe with or whatever, the charge that happens, and all of the things that happen first again in your mind and how it manifests in actual action of many different kinds. And also it speaks to behavior and our sexualities, whatever, that's a part of what drives us on many different levels. It's a creative thing. It's a biological thing. It's an obsessive thing. And I'll tell you one thing, it's certainly fertile ground for telling great stories. And I love erotic thrillers. I love stories that turn on that attraction between men and women and what it says about us, what it says about our human natures, what it says about even moving beyond that. And we're not getting many good erotic stories anymore. There's a lot of sex in TV, but it doesn't really delve into the erotic. It's more perfunctory, like, okay, these people are banging, but to enjoy eroticism, especially in cinema, on screen, has always been something ever since I was a little kid I've really enjoyed. And I feel that our civilization is sort of missing something. I feel like all of eroticism, all of sexuality, I mean, there's a lot of talk about people's sexuality and their identity, but there's not a lot of talk about the fucking, the actual boom boom. And I wonder why that is. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why, but especially in terms of cinema, and how I think it's a genre that we've almost entirely lost, the erotic thriller. I mean, growing up, especially in the 80s and 90s, we had so many great erotic thrillers. I mean, I remember seeing Body Heat, Kathleen Turner and William Hurt. In the early 80s, Lawrence Kasdan, who wrote Raiders and wrote Empire Strikes Back, it was his feature film debut that he directed. And, that film was dripping with eroticism, and how Kathleen Turner used her feminine wiles to seduce William Hurt to get him to do things for her, unsavory things. And I love that, and I miss that. And I want to delve into that. Now, first of all, as you know, I look for articles, and I wanted to find an article. I was looking for articles that sort of define, first of all, what is eroticism as opposed to sexuality. I think sexuality is a part of eroticism, of course, but you don't necessarily need something to be overtly sexual to be erotic. And I found an essay, and it was published on in July of 2016, and it's by Ferdinand Fellman, who he's part of the Department of Philosophy, Chemnitz University of Technology, Chemnitz, Germany. And he wrote this article. It was actually, I found it in Scientific Research, an academic publisher, at www.scirp. Because, I'll look for articles anywhere. But the article's called Eroticism, Why It Still Matters. It's an academic paper. I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'm just going to read 2 sections of it. And then I have an article that I found in Italy about erotic cinema that was just published. But I figured I would start with this because it's rather, I thought that it was rather fascinating. So I figured I would start with that. And it's, I like, some people get mad, I guess, that I read articles, but I like doing it. Only because I learn from them. It's like I find things that I really enjoy. So here's the article. Let me just bring it down a little bit more so we can see it, and we'll jump in. So here we go. Here it is. The meaning of eroticism. Eroticism as a term constitutes a problem, linguistically as well as semantically. As with the adjective erotic, one associates the erotic with prostitution, obscenity, pornography. In normal language, lust, sex, and the erotic are interrelated terms. Subsequently, a scientific definition of eroticism is very difficult to formulate. In order to find a core meaning of eroticism, I will therefore give an overview of the use of this term in biology, sociology, and psychology. Biologists rarely use the term. If I have read him correctly, in The Mating Mind, Jeffrey Miller speaks of sexuality, sexual relations, etc., but often in the sense of erotic feelings transcending mere sexual excitement. The same applies to the evolutionary biology of human female sexuality by Thornhill and Gangstead from 2008. When describing the display of women's extended sexualities, the author speaks of sexual interest, but the term eroticism appears only once. As a result, there seems to be no sharp demarcating line between eroticism and sexuality. In his classic The Evolution of Human Sexuality, Simmons, in 1979, discusses the issues of the psychology of sexual arousal, including erotic pictures as stimuli. For him, erotic material that is close to pornography reveals little about sexuality that exists in ordinary life. On the other hand, Simmons refers to sexuality as emotionally volatile and seeking the exceptional. Jim Faust, in his research on human sexual function, focuses on subjective and objective measures of sexual desire and pleasure, and has shown how such measures are altered by different types of erotic stimulation. In Why We Love, the renowned anthropologist Fisher gives a list of types of love. The most celebrated is eros, or passionate, sexual, erotic, joyful, high-energy love for a special partner. I think eros is a combination of lust and romantic love. In Chapter 8 of her Anatomy of Love, entitled Eros, Emergence of the Sexual Emotions, Fisher states that sexual emotions are millions of years old and evolved along with the brain. Cross-cultural research shows a great variety in the relation between sex and society. Sexual life in nature societies has been studied by ethnologists such as Bronislaw Malowski. For Malowski, eroticism comprises sexual approaches as well as erotic approaches. In The Sexual Life of Savages, he writes, "Sex, in the wildest meaning, is rather a sociological and cultural force than a mere bodily relation of two individuals." But the scientific treatment of this subject obviously involves also a keen interest in the biological nucleus. In this statement, Malinowski reminds sociologists that man is not a blank slate. Cultural configurations are always based on a ground, and the ground is nature, inner and outer, which provides the structure or style of awareness, the way of seeing, as Malinowski called it. Nature is preformed, materia signata in medieval ontology, and this means, in regards to eroticism, that sexuality is not merely receptive, but transforms intimate relations into meaningful gestures of social consent. It's kind of interesting. In describing late 20th century processes of social change, the renowned sociologist Anthony Giddens postulates a transformation of intimacy in the direction of confluent love and plastic sexuality. The model of plastic sexuality provides for the possibility of sexual interaction as a means of emotional communication, separate from procreation. In this context, Giddens defines eroticism not as a particular skill of stimulating sexual desire, but as the cultivation of feeling expressed through bodily sensation in a communicative context. Eroticism, thus, is sexuality within a wider range of emotional intentions, leading to personal ties between men and women as equals. Or I guess you could take that further, men and men, women and women, but people as equals to one another, I would say, if I wrote that book, but I didn't. So, the optimistic view of eroticism appears utopic, since empirical research shows that sexual intimacy, modern egalitarian views notwithstanding, continues to be structured by inequalities. This state of affairs is certainly due to sociological accounts, but a more basic anthropological view points to the biological roots of the male-female polarity in the realm of erotic love. Far from holding out a promise of boundless social progress, eroticism stands for sexual relationships with their inherent contradictions that mark the complexity of human social life. More explicitly, psychologists such as Richard Wilhelm emphasize the ambivalence of love as prospective satisfaction coupled with prospective frustration. Psychoanalytic thinkers speak of erotic love as superior to mere sexual arousal shown by animals. Erich Fromm, for example, reproaches Freud for making no distinction between sexual and erotic love, thus missing human uniqueness. Fromm's famous The Art of Loving reminds us of the Latin poet Ovid, who in The Art of Love considers love as a mental disease to be cured. Fromm suggests that problems among couples reflect the fragility of modern eroticism, which often requires the therapeutic discourse to recreate the psychological stability of the partners. On the other hand, Freud states that eros, assenting to life, is not alien to death. It is the ambiguity and hence the self-transcendence of Eros, which we are insisting on. The sexual nature of Eros does not cease to wholly exist, but is thoroughly transmuted and blended in the higher character of mental life. And the connection between sexual excitement and death, experienced in the ambivalent feeling of mutual orgasm, constitutes the paradox of the human mind as part of nature and at the same time distant from nature. Which, that's what I want to read, that part. I mean, I thought that was rather, word salad, sure, but very interesting. But basically that last bit, the fact is so much of our own arousal comes from inside our head. We make it up. I mean, really, when you think about it, there's the biological urge to procreate. It just so happens that the equipment that is used to do that also, when you can anticipate it and think about it and be desirous of it, well, then it becomes something you want to do when you're not procreating. And why not? I mean, anything that feels good. What I've always been fascinated by in terms of movies, and I think that's why I fell in love with the work of David Cronenberg. One of the things that I loved about David Cronenberg's early body horror work, and he repeated this theme over and over again, beginning with his first feature, They Came From Within, but it also goes back to Stereo and Crimes of the Future, not the one he recently made, but his student film, Crimes of the Future, that David Cronenberg's films really concern themselves with the fact that we are beings of the mind and the spirit and the intellect. And at any one time, our bodies are this intellect, this spirit, whatever you want to call it, is contained in this physical structure that causes us, well, we get hungry, we want things, we have these erotic thoughts, we're trapped, our intellect is trapped in these physical bodies that not only can give us tremendous pain and tremendous pleasure, but at the same time will revolt against us at the drop of a hat. So often, his stories, especially in his early body horror work, were about our physical forms or the physical forms of the characters in his movies turning on them. The Fly being the obvious example. Jeff Goldblum's character, Seth Brundle, goes through the telepod. He has his DNA mixed up with the fly, and of course his body starts transforming underneath him. And it's horrific. And there is nothing that can help him, nothing that can save him. And watching the destruction of the intellect and the mind because the body is giving way or changing or altering or transmuting, doing whatever, that used to just, I loved that theme. I've always loved that theme. And, you could take it to the other extreme is that our bodies will eventually revolt against all of us. They accelerated decrepitude, as they said in Blade Runner. We will die. Our intellect, everything that makes us who we are, will eventually be destroyed by the physical form that carries us around, that sustains our intellect, that sustains our minds, and we will eventually lose that battle. Our bodies will consume who and what we are at some point. Now, I'm not saying that our bodies aren't a part of us. They are. But at the end of the day, if there was any way, and I think maybe sometime in maybe the not too distant future, our intellect, our memories, all of those things, maybe because of the digital era, will be able to transcend the revolt of our bodies or the decrepitude of our bodies. Maybe. I'd like to believe that would be, it's kind of like in Star Trek 3, the Spock's Katra. And when Sarek is telling Kirk about this, why did you not bring him back to us? And there's that great moment, and Mark Leonard plays it so well when he says, then everything he knew, everything he was, is gone. And I've always been saddened by that. It's a theme that I return to in the stories that I love. The idea is that all the things that people, Blade Runner, I've seen things you people wouldn't believe. Attack ships on fire off the shoulder of Orion. I've seen C-beams glitter in the dark near the Tannhauser Gates. I mean, the idea that Roy Batty, even though he's an artificial person, he proves himself to have a soul when he gives that beautiful speech, because They are things that only he saw. And even if we saw them, the way we saw them would be different than the way he saw them. And when he's revealed at the end of Blade Runner to have the soul of a poet, and indeed have all he wants, depending on which version of the movie you watch, I want more life, father, or I want more life, fucker. But the idea of wanting more life because there's more to see. I mean, it's really the basis of so many great stories throughout all of human existence. And a lot of that is driven by nobody wants to go through life alone. And I think one of the great things about life in general, meaning real life, and then also in the life of stories, whether you're reading a novel or whether you're watching a movie, you want to find somebody that to be able to pleasure one another together, to let somebody into your space. And then not only that, but if you really think about our own sexualities and what we like, and it's really kind of goofy. I mean, really, if you look at it from afar, it's kind of goofy, but when you're coming at it from an intellectual, sexual, it's coming out of who you are. Your sexuality comes out of your soul, not just your physicality, and the things that turn you on, and the fact that we can create all this crazy behavior around our physical and mental desires has always fascinated me. I've always thought that was cool. I always thought that was cool, and I always thought. The whole idea of our mental capacity and our physical capacity and how sometimes the two don't meet has always been fascinating and great fodder for stories. Let me just read a little bit more from this article. It was a conclusion. It gets into a little bit more that I thought was interesting and worth sharing. This is part 4 of this article, and eroticism and ethics, which feeds into the storytelling aspects of all of this. The moral problems of human behavior can be resolved by a study of the extension of the sex impulse into erotic sentiments that combine feeling and cognition. I consider the emergence of erotic sentiments in mating behavior as the dawn of the moral sense. For an explanation of this seemingly unlikely position, it is helpful to go back to Darwin, who approached the question of morality exclusively from the perspective of natural history. He arrived at the conclusion that the moral sense results from a combination of social instincts and mental powers. Darwin stresses that the social instincts in animals do not contribute to individual happiness, but to the general good or welfare of the community. Compared with welfare as the primary impulse, happiness of the individual has to be considered a merely secondary guide in moral behavior. In the animal kingdom, welfare and happiness coincide. The human, on the other hand, is the only animal for whom this congruence is broken. From these conflicting feelings, there results the moral sense, which is quantitatively different from the act of helping a fellow creature, as shown by Darwin's heroic baboon blindly following its instincts. The acclaimed anthropologist Frans de Waal follows Darwin on this track in his popular writings. However, whereas Darwin makes a difference between sympathy and love, de Waal combines both in the ambiguous term of empathy. As welcome as the overcoming of the traditional anthropocentric view may be, anthropomorphizing animals and zoomorphizing humans does not further the understanding of the different worlds we live in. The so-called natural normativity demonstrated by non-human primates is mainly a social technique for survival in their environment. Modern psychologists have studied the emotional and moral aspects of the helping attitude. This leads to the conclusion that pro-social behavior in help giving does not yet reach the standard of human ethics. Different from cooperative behavior, the moral sense is self-reflexive, resulting from higher-order emotions. At this point, morality is connected with eroticism. The connection is formal in the sense that erotic love and moral responsibility both require the faculty to take distance from the present situation and to consider the other as a means for pleasure and at the same time as an end in itself. Readers familiar with ethics will recognize in this idea the second formulation of Immanuel Kant's moral imperative. This formula dictates that every rational being, whether yourself or another, must be treated never as a mere means, but as the supreme limiting condition in the use of all means as an end at the same time. The biological key point of how to interpret each species' particular way of living together is to acknowledge various emotional adjustments under various environmental conditions. Regarding ideas about human moral uniqueness, the differences alone don't make the difference, as Gregory Bateson would have said. In terms of mere quantitative differences, all is relative. Hence, relativism is not a good method of validation. It would just be surrendering to the facts. Sexuality connects species in their genes, physiology, and behavior. Erotic pursuits, on the other hand, deal with concrete processes in the life history of the individual. Only subjective experiences enable our species to review and tax the differences in a moral sense. Humans assume personal responsibility for their actions and are bound to justify them. This faculty, of course, is highly cultural, but since Margaret Mead wrote in the 1962 Introduction to Male and Female that she would lay more emphasis on man's biological inheritance from earlier human forms of life, I feel justified to look for the earliest small emotional deviation between animal and human sexuality, and I find it in the reading of erotic face-to-face expression. To be sure, nobody can feel the feelings of another being. There is no argument about explanations of the state of feeling per se. In other words, feeling cannot be translated into thought without transformation in accordance with the attributional model of emotions elaborated by modern psychology. On the other hand, however, there are states of mind that the other may feel in a manner similar to my own feelings. This evidence of you is characteristic for common subjective experiences in intimate relations, especially in erotic love. In animals, most behavior patterns are performed without an associated emotion. In fact, without any empathy and participation, as shown by the well-known case of birds pairing and caring for their young ones. If a young one falls out of the nest and dies, the parent birds fly over its corpse without recognizing it as their dead nestling. Their sense of identification is restricted to a definite area of time and space. Similarly, a dog recognizing his former master after a passage of many years has the usual impression of man's appearance, but of the time that has since elapsed, he surely has no memory, such as humans would have. And elephants may indeed recognize their dead descendants and be sad, but only for a relatively short time. Human parents, on the contrary, never forget their deceased children. A biologist would maintain that domesticated mammals feel in the same way as humans. Take the example of a dog awaiting with impatience the return of his master. He is anticipating the master's return and is clearly happy when the master arrives. The dog's whole attention is concentrated on the door where his master will enter. In a similar way, a husband awaits the return of his wife when she is late. He is listening for the door like the dog. Even so, there's an important difference. He is concerned about her, afraid that she may have been in an accident. This mental attitude presupposes detachment from present restlessness as well as making inferences about it. Concern is more than merely feeling someone's absence, and it is very unlikely that a dog is concerned about his master's fate in a similar way. There exists, in fact, a vast discussion regarding the question of whether a dog can hope or not. Hope is a specific attitude, a higher order mixture of feelings and thinking, transcending mere expectations and implying sensitivity to the pain of deception. As an ambivalent emotion combining joy and fear, hope is intrinsic to love, and this turns eroticism into the comprehensive medium of human social existence. Heady stuff, interesting stuff. By the way, this is a really long article. I did put the link to this article in the description. But yeah, I mean, I've always found this all very interesting. And again, all of my fascination with this subject, I hate to admit this. I don't hate to admit this, I guess, but I do kind of hate to admit this. It's embarrassing. It all came out of Star Trek. And I don't mean to be flippant about it, but for everything that Star Trek is and was and has been, let's face it, it was also 60s cheesecake sci-fi, totally appealing to the male gaze. I mean, hot girls in miniskirts and go-go boots, big busted hippie women, feminine women. I mean, this shaped my gaze from a young age, and I knew I liked it. Nichelle Nichols, Lieutenant Uhura herself, was my first call her celebrity crush. She combined, not only was she strikingly beautiful, not only did I love her voice. I mean, she had one of the greatest voices like in television history, and to hear her voice. And there were times when she was really vulnerable, like she tells Kirk once, "I'm frightened." I'm like, I wanted to crawl into the screen and give her a hug. But all of Star Trek certainly played on that, in addition to all the optimistic vision of the future. And look, Kirk sure is known as a ladies' man, but he gets a lot less ladies than he's portrayed as getting. And the women that he did have in the show, his past loves, they were all very capable. Lawyers, doctors, scientists. I mean, his tastes were high. And I'll tell you something, sure, in an episode like Bread and Circuses, Pro Counsel might have thrown him a few curves, and you get that aspect as well. But, or when Barbara Boucher comes in, rolling in, having taken form from the Andromeda Galaxy, Kirk's, he's not beyond doing what he needed to do to save his ship. And that was a part of Star Trek as well. And to say that it isn't is disingenuous. And I loved it. I loved the fact that incredibly revealing clothing, beautiful women. I'm not going to lie, that was definitely a part of the appeal of Star Trek, and it started to shape my worldview when I was 5 years old. But the thing about it Star Trek had some really interesting things to say. There were things that I would see when I was a kid, like when Khan, you'd think Khan's trying to take over the Enterprise, and he's completely ensorcelled Marla MacGyver's, the historian on board the Enterprise, with his power. And I mean, she is erotically drawn to him, and he even says to her, "Your hobbies, such men?" She paints strong men, and Khan's like, and these kinds of men, conquerors, leaders. Kirk even says they were more colorful, and MacGyver says to Kirk, "Yeah, they were," and Kirk says, "I appreciate your honesty." So you learned all about these things. So you showed that there was a capable, smart woman who was, hot for teacher, hot for a leader, hot for men of the past. And of course, then she's presented with one in Khan Noonien Singh, and it's like her dream, her erotic fantasies made flesh, but even him, what I really liked about that was, he has Marla MacGyver's on the ground, and he could do anything he wants. But what does he do? What does he say to her? He goes, "Look, go or stay, but do it because it is what you wish to do." I mean, and I've felt that way my whole life. I've never, I look at people like Harvey Weinstein, who just got, he was a horrible man that used his position of power to reduce women to devices to give him pleasure. I learned when I was 5, 6, 7 years old, what you wanted was a woman to stay with you because she wanted to be there. And that was the thing. Go or stay, but do it because it is what you wish to do. And that was, in my life, that was probably one of the great lessons. You know, all my past relationships or all the women that I've ever been with, I wanted them to want to be with me. That was the whole point. You would never force yourself on a woman. What was that? You wanted to find middle ground. You wanted her to want to paint you the way Marla MacGyver's painted Con Nooney and Singh in her quarters. I mean, that was the great lesson I learned from Star Trek in terms of relationships. You never force yourself on anyone. That's what you want, is somebody to come to your quarters, come to be with you because they want to be. And I think that was one of the many lessons that I learned from Star Trek. And I think that was something that I've known for a long time. And it's always disappointing to me when I see lesser behavior. People that I've never understood, this idea that a beautiful woman promises, I mean, what? Because she's beautiful, she's going to give you great pleasure? No. A woman will give you great pleasure if she decides to be with you. She wants to be with you. That was a lesson I learned from Star Trek. But that's not, let's bring this back around to movies. Let's talk some movies here. Because I think we're in a weird place where, because sexuality and eroticism has been so commodified that the birth rates are falling everywhere. No one's sleeping with anyone. Why do that? Why put up with aggravation when you can just watch pornography on the internet? It's very, very strange. It's very strange. You don't have the joy of being with somebody who wants to be with you. But anyway, let's jump into this article that I found that I want to read, because I really thought this article was great. Shout out to my friend Cody. I work with Cody as an editor on a Lifetime movie called I Know Where Lizzie Is, directed by Darren Scott, and we became friends. So Cody actually sent me this article, which I appreciate Cody for sending it to me. This was published in an Italian. I found this on Speech. You can see again the link down below, but this article is called "The Puritanical Eye: Hypermediation, Sex on Film, and the Disavowal of Desire," and it's by DeCarly Gomez. Or Gomez, I think it's Gomez, 25th of November, 2023, and that's what this, where I found this article. And again, the link is down below. And this essay is a contribution to a special issue that explores the potential resurgence of the erotic thriller in contemporary Hollywood landscape. The erotic thriller in contemporary cinema and streaming. So here's the article. Are movies having enough sex? When Nomi Malone is told by the owner of the casino she's headlining at in Paul Verhoeven's Showgirls, "You are the show," we understand Verhoeven's obvious point about the commodification of sex in America. But there is a deeper meaning to that statement, and the statement of much of Verhoeven's work, including Showgirls, that speaks to the connection between our bodies, our bodily experiences, and the spectacle of consumerism. That at a certain point in time, our corporeal existence was still a space to find thrills, particularly within mainstream Hollywood cinema, to find moments of ecstasy and pleasure, to luxuriate in the feeling of being pulled in by spectacle, being implicated in it, rather than experiencing it at remove with our body involvement, suppressed or blocked altogether. There was a time when, as moviegoers, we were part of the show, when our participation in the story with our hearts, our minds, our bodies was part of the experience of watching the film, and essentially completed the work itself. That time is gone. I never quite heard it put that way. That when you're watching an erotic thriller, or indeed an erotic film like 9.5 Weeks or Last Tango in Paris, you getting turned on, whether you're a man or a woman watching this film, you're completing the actual scene that you're watching. And if you watch a great erotic scene that's beautifully directed or shot, I would posit that one of the great erotic scenes in my lifetime was Susan Sarandon being seduced by Catherine Deneuve in The Hunger 40 years ago. Watching one woman who's a vampire seduce another one of the most strikingly beautiful scenes ever shot, I think, in terms of seduction. And even though it's two women, which is in itself beautiful, and there's a sinister aspect to it, and that one of them's turning the other one into a vampire, but the male gaze comes in full force. And if you're not turned on by that scene, you're supposed to be turned on by that scene. The scene, you're caught up in it. You're caught up in both Miriam Blaylock's seduction of Sarah Roberts, and you're caught up in the idea that these are two incredibly beautiful women, and I am certainly getting off watching this. Of course, it plays into vampirism and all that, but the idea that your reaction to the scene, and I've talked to both men and women about this scene, and both find it arousing, that arousal completes what Tony Scott, as the director, was hoping to achieve. So I love this idea. There was a time when we as moviegoers, we were part of the show. When our participation in the story with our hearts, our minds, our bodies was part of the experience of watching the film and essentially completed the work itself. That is a great insight. I love that insight. But that time is gone. If you ask Paul Verhoeven if movies are having enough sex, he'll patently answer, no. In an interview with Variety in July of 2021, Paul Verhoeven says, "There's been a general shift towards Puritanism. I think there's a misunderstanding about sexuality in the United States. Sexuality is the most essential element of nature. I'm always amazed people are shocked by sex in movies." He'd be right. There's a general shift toward Puritanism, not just in movies, but in broader popular culture and our political realities, asserted by both liberal and conservative politics to varying degrees. Police budgets are bigger than they've ever been. Abortion rights are being repealed across the country. Countless states are passing dangerous and harmful legislation, ostensibly outlawing transgender people's right to exist. Certainly, the #MeToo movement has changed our social posture towards sex, with benefits and drawbacks. The culture wars insist we focus our attention on artifacts and the language of culture rather than on our material realities. The list is endless. How should we understand the sex scene in Hollywood and the absence of sex scenes that were so much more prolific in the films of the near past, like Basic Instinct and Showgirls, within the context of the broader landscape of the commodification of all aspects of our lived experience, including sex, our bodies, our emotions, our relationships, under neoliberal capitalism? You know, I've talked about things. What's really interesting to me is, and I've spoken about this a lot, but I had LGBTQ, I had first gay male friends and then gay female friends. And then I had a few trans friends, but I didn't know trans people when I was 13. But what was really interesting, and I was straight myself, but I liked the fact that my gay friends were very much driven, my gay male friends were very much driven by their sexuality. That was a big part of gay lifestyle. And I like that. I like that kind of unfettered sexuality. I didn't quite understand it, but all the gay men that I knew in Seattle, mostly part of the same Seattle film scene, and one of my friends was gay. Actually, a lot of my friends are gay. Some of them didn't tell me they were gay. I knew they were gay, but they didn't tell me they were gay. I'm like, what are you hiding from me? What? But it was an interesting thing, but their sexuality was a big part of it. And I liked that. I thought that was something cool to me. And it was interesting to see. That's why I find, like, now what's interesting is now you hear a lot about the people that are deciding that they're non-binary. And I've often thought, and I haven't seen this because I really don't know as many people that are non-binary yet, but I know a few, but sexuality doesn't seem to be a driving force in their lives. Maybe that's just because I don't know much about it, to be honest. But it's like, if you're saying that you're non-binary, you're not male or female, you don't identify with either, what are you? What do you identify as? And I haven't really worked up the courage to ask somebody, or I haven't known somebody who's non-binary enough to get into those intimate details. Like, how do they view their own sexuality? are they, have they moved away from their own sexuality? Because, you know, like the gay men that I knew, they definitely, it was very binary. They just were on the same side of it. but the whole non-binary idea, which I can understand, not identifying as either male or female, but what is the sexuality of being non-binary? Are you attracted to both sexes or not? I don't really know. I haven't had the experience, but it's interesting to me. But from what I understand, it seems to be pulling back away from sexuality as opposed to jumping into it and embracing it. I don't know, and maybe that's all a part of the whole attitude towards sexuality, is that we are moving away from it because of the way it's perceived to be something that has been victimizing. I don't know. It could be that. I don't know. In the last 25 years, the time since the erotic thriller and more broadly speaking, the mid-budget adult drama had its heyday. Sex, its depictions, its implications, its exploration, and importantly, our desire and literacy for it, has steadily disappeared. Unpacking the complexities of this shift is no simple task. There are several important symbiotic dynamics at work here. The changes to the modes, the actual processes, the mechanisms and mediums of movie making over the last 10 to 15 years in particular, the changes in modes through which we consume film and media, the continued expansion of the free market and its demands for higher profit margins and less risk, particularly in the film industry, and of course implied in all of the aforementioned is the continued immiseration of a pleasure and sustenance-deprived populace living under the late stages of neoliberal capitalism. These dynamics have resulted in a chicken-egg type of phenomenon where the increased commodification of films and the ideas and images contained in them and the winnowing away of our material stability has left little room for sex in movies and simultaneously bludgeoned the appetite for it out of us. I totally see that. I mean, the actual act of sexuality or thinking about it has been bludgeoned out of us. I mean, I've been made to feel that my own erotic desires leave someone a victim. That my own biological imperatives would do nothing but victimize another human being, which is a weird place to be at. But I feel it, rightly or wrongly. The fetishizing of the free market, deregulation, and privatization has been working its dark magic on our lives for decades. But things have escalated at a rapid clip in the last 20 years. The crash of dot-coms at the millennium, September 11th, the housing market crash of 2008, the 2016 election, the COVID-19 pandemic, the ensuing recession we're still in the throes of, and the mass violence we are witnessing against the Palestinians through screens in the palm of our hands are just some of the paradigm-shifting events of the last 2 decades. During this time, the consolidation of media ownership has reduced the number of major studios, distributors, and exhibitors in the film industry, alongside the rise of on-demand viewing and streaming platforms and social media apps as primary modes of media consumption. What's emerged is a highly competitive environment where the profit demands are higher than ever, and films are now increasingly designed by boardrooms, market testing, and artificially intelligent algorithms. In his essay for Vox, Can Monoculture Survive the Algorithm? I read that. Kyle Chaka writes, the algorithm is a replacement for our internal monologues and our judgments about what we want to consume. Streaming's passivity is different from linear TV, but in the end, it's still passive. You know, it's really weird. Like, when I was growing up in the 80s, when I was going to junior high and high school and college, there was never a thought that there would be a school shooting. I mean, really, what men were what we were as dudes were interested in. I mean, I was interested in seeing movies and partying and making out with girls. I didn't know a lot of angry people. I knew a lot of people. We had a lot of fun. You know, I look back at my junior high and high school years with great fondness. And I think anybody that I knew in high school, we were having a pretty good time. And well, even since the 7th grade, I was having a pretty good time, to be honest. And now, I don't know if that's the case. there's a malevolence that seems to have taken over youth culture. There's an anger, and I see a lot of it. Maybe it's always been there and I just wasn't aware of it, or we weren't aware of it because we didn't have social media. But, and I was watching a lot of, not pornography, but a lot of erotic material. One of the reasons I didn't watch a lot of pornography as a junior high and high school student was not because I didn't necessarily want to see it, but because when you had a VCR, and the only place my VCR was in basically the biggest room in the house that was right next to the garage, and it was right above my parents' bedroom. There was no opportunity for me to, watch All American Girls, which was a favorite back in the day. You had to wait till somebody wasn't home. So I really liked movies that had erotic content in them. And I did, I liked that better than pornography. But it was interesting. The use of market research, test screenings, and audience segmentation to identify the most profitable concepts and target specific demographics has led to a definitive homogenization of media and film. This is not a new phenomenon, but is taking on a new shape in the digital age. In the past, the monoculture referred to the middle-class white American entertainment that dominated popular culture and media during the final peak of broadcast television. Today, the digital monoculture operates with the same hegemonic forces, but with a different set of characters and characteristics, particularly those that thrive in a digital landscape of easily recognizable and instantly consumable reference points that can be taken in during the time it takes for something to pass your gaze mid-scroll. Cheka writes, digital media, by contrast, prioritizes immediate engagement over the slow blooming of art. I get the sense that today's algorithms would prioritize deep dream patterns, a mimetic style without content, over late Rembrandt. The danger of prioritizing the monoculture is that we might not get as many Rembrandts in the future. So we're left with a landscape wherein films that are algorithmically deemed to have a higher chance of success are given more resources and marketing budgets, while riskier projects that might appeal to a smaller number of people rather than the entirety of the four quadrants, are often ignored or underfunded or go directly to streaming or become serialized in some way. And sex scenes and films like Basic Instinct and Showgirls in the 90s don't appeal to the four quadrants, do they? If the four quadrants contained children as a key audience demographic lumped in with the rest of the movie-going public. Not only are entertainment conglomerates afraid of having their reputation and their balance sheets linked with potentially controversial content and art, but the mediums through which we consume most media and art are ones that enable increased censorship, curation, and algorithmically designed personalization. Digital streaming platforms can more readily be controlled and manipulated by the corporations and technologies that run them. The decline of the sex scene as fallout accompanying the decline of mid-budget adult drama comes with the profit motive ratcheting up to the point where the only economically viable ventures are those that appeal to the four-quadrant audience map. It seems like it's almost a backdoor way of making the observation that most cinema is now Marvel adjacent, superheroes, etc. So I wonder if it's not even necessarily about the absence of sex scenes, but about the absence of the general environment in which the sex scene would be warranted. Doreen St. Felix writes in The New Yorker. Even the errant superhero movie in the 90s was more than likely still one made primarily for adults, with adult themes, including and especially sex. Take, for example, Tim Burton's Batman Returns, a film alight with sexual imagery and language. Everything from Michelle Pfeiffer's BDSM Catwoman to the slinky euphemisms that populate nearly every scene of dialogue. Batman Returns oozes with lust. Both Penguin and Batman yearn for Catwoman's touch, even if it means being clawed, perhaps especially then. For her part, Pfeiffer leaned into the sex kitten allure, lounging across beds in that leather fetish suit, giving herself a bath with a long pink tongue and snarling that blood-red lip in such a way that she and her whip launched countless crushes. Oh my, yes. The current Marvel-adjacent world, a world of familiar characters, endless sequels and reduxes, franchises that stretch decades, a world that is constantly looking back and never forward to something new, something not previously made or tested, is one that Mark Fisher anticipates in his luminary work, Capitalist Realism, where he discusses the impulse of recursion in our cultural output as an expression of the anxiety contained in our acceptance of the catastrophe that is capitalism, contained in our deluded acceptance that there is no alternative to capitalism. The future, Fisher writes, harbors only reiteration and repermutation. Nostalgia and repermutation in the Marvel Cinematic Universe in Spider-Man No Way Home. Indeed, the market asserts that what we've loved before we'll love again, and that not only will this recursive posture lead to a certain profit, but the halo of nostalgia that comes along with it will generate an extra boost in capital to boot. The drive to capitalize on childhood favorites of those who now have spendable income and drive a large portion of the market means that most of our media is based on children's artifacts from 30 years ago and franchises originally made for children. Piggybacking on an old monoculture is less risky than starting from scratch, writes Chekya. Indeed, Fisher cites one T.S. Eliot and his essay, Tradition and the Individual Talent, as prophesizing this kind of infantilization of the public and our cultural outputs. Eliot described the reciprocal relationship between the canonical and the new. The new defines itself in response to what is already established. At the same time, the established has to reconfigure itself in response to the new. Tradition counts for nothing when it is no longer contested and modified. A culture that is merely preserved is no culture at all. We are continuously, constantly, cryogenically freezing cultural outputs from the past to be consumed in the present. But these artifacts are deranged ghosts of what they once were, distorted visions of the familiar, a signifier of a feeling we once had, all of the thing's original meaning and emotional resonance stripped away in order to serve one purpose: automatic consumption that generates capital. Star Trek to a T, modern Star Trek to a T. That is, to say the least, not a very sexy time in which to live. The simultaneous decline of the mid-budget adult drama with the rise of the superhero franchise and broader four-quadrant proclivities of the business of movie making has not only sterilized our stories, but it's also sterilized the actors that populate them. Movies in the 1980s and 90s didn't just have more sex, they also had bodies that look and felt real, in addition to being beautiful. Take, for example, Elias Koteas' character Vaughn in David Cronenberg's resplendent masterpiece, Crash. Speaking of Cronenberg, from 1996. Koteas' Vaughn is covered in scars, has a receding hairline, and has grotesque tattoos on his torso. Yet he's one of the film's protagonists who is positioned as a sex symbol and object of desire within the world of the film, and for the audience. And he is, in fact, incredibly alluring and sexy. His draw is undeniable. In this way, sex in movies like Crash and its contemporaries like The Color of Night, Amen, and The Last Seduction and Basic Instinct felt more human, more connected to the viewer. The thrill of the possible bringing us in, allowing us to live vicariously through people on screen. While one could argue that Crash is an auteur's film, and while its director David Cronenberg is Canadian, the movie was produced with Hollywood money by a major Hollywood studio, New Line Cinema, and the actors in it, James Spader, Holly Hunter, Rosanna Arquette, were and are major Hollywood stars. The film is, for all intents and purposes, in the canon of mid-budget adult dramas and more specifically erotic thrillers coming out of Hollywood in the 80s and 90s. The hyper-fit, plasticine figures of today's movies automatically put us at further remove. And perhaps that's why it's easier for us to detach our corporeal and emotional selves from the experience of watching movies. And why perhaps when we're met with something that necessarily pierces that easy distance, like a sex scene, we recoil. As Raquel S. Benedict writes in her brilliant and often plagiarized piece for Blood Knife magazine, everyone is beautiful and no one is horny. Now if I could jump in here, I totally agree with this. You know, this is going to seem like a weird thing to say, but one of the first, I would say in my mind, one of the first modern 80s teen films is actually 1978's Jaws 2. Jaws 2 is a cruising movie. It's basically an update of American Graffiti, but instead of cars, they have catamarans. And there's a shark trying to eat them. But in it, the teenagers, maybe they're skewing a little old, but they all look very normal. Some of them have pot bellies. You know, they look like normal people. One of the things I really loved about movies of the 70s is that everybody looked normal. Gene Hackman was a great actor, and I loved watching him on screen, but he was he wasn't the most handsome man in the room. Another one of my heroes, Roy Scheider, when he stars in All That Jazz, he's incredibly sexy. I don't know if anyone would think of him that way today, but I thought he was sexy just watching him. No wonder he could bang whoever he wanted, even though he was supposed to be Bob Fosse. Nowadays, people are like too beautiful. They don't even seem real. And like I'm always banging on about verisimilitude. One of the problems that I have with like modern films today, like I remember the first time I ever noticed this was in the movie She's All That. See, She's All That, Rachel Lee Cook. And in that movie, Rachel Lee Cook is supposed to be this kind of mousy chick. When clearly, I mean, Rachel Lee Cook is incredibly beautiful. And like there's a scene when they go to the beach in that movie, and I think she's wearing a one piece. And I remember when I first saw that film, I'm thinking to myself, I can say this now. I know I'm older now, but at the time it was like 20 years ago or something. When she was I'm like, she's got a great little body. No one would think that she's some mousy, undesirable girl. No one. She's the girl that I think most of the audience would find most attractive. You know, and I felt that way in one of my favorite teen films of the 80s was a movie called Secret Admirer. A lot of people haven't seen it. C. Thomas Howell, Lori Loughlin, John Travolta's passed away, his wife who passed away. Great cast, really funny, really great teen movie. But in this movie, Lori Loughlin is the best friend of C. Thomas Howell. Lori Loughlin, who ended up marrying Massimo, you know, she was on Full House, is this beautiful brunette. And while I really appreciate the hot blonde, when I was watching that movie the first time, I'm like, bruh, the woman that you should be with is already your best friend and will already bring the erotic thunder to your bedroom because she's in love with you. And it used to annoy me. It's the same thing was true of the movie Some Kind of Wonderful that Howard Deutsch directed, that John Hughes produced. You know, Eric Stoltz, his best friend Watts, who is so sexy and so in love with him. And I know he wants to get with Amanda Jones, played by Leah Thompson. I get it. But I'm like, you have this dynamo that's already in love with you, who's your best friend, and it was so annoying. And Secret Admirer and Some Kind of Wonderful, I think Secret Admirer was 85 and Some Kind of Wonderful was 86. But both of those movies bugged the shit out of me because I'm like, I love both those movies. I love Some Kind of Wonderful. I love way more. And Ilias Koteas is in that too. He's in Saturday Detention. Those movies drove me crazy because I'm like, bro, you could get busy with your best friends. They're madly in love with you, and they're hot. Anyway, drove me crazy. But nowadays, everyone is beautiful. Like, too beautiful. And it ruins everything for me. The reality of people. You know, it was funny. The Grand Theft Auto 6 trailer dropped today, and I'm like, wow, the girls in this trailer are thick. I love it. It's fantastic. I mean, I'm like, all these girls are banging, but they look like more like real people. There's more verisimilitude in the Grand Theft Auto 6 trailer than there is in most teen dramas these days. Because every kid has been to the gym 7,000 hours a day. Crazy. It's a different time. Anyway. Here we go. Everyone is beautiful and no one is horny. In the films of the 80s and 90s, leading actors were good looking, yes, but still human. Kurt Russell's Snake Plissken was a hunk, but in shirtless scenes, his abs have no definition. Bruce Willis was handsome, but he's more muscular now than he was in the 90s when he was routinely branded a bona fide sex symbol. What would conversation about 21st century American pop culture and politics be without the mention of September 11th? 9/11, of course, also contributed to the shifts not only in our political realities, but in the content of popular culture and the nature of film and media consumed by the American public. America was at war again, and as we see in Verhoeven's Starship Troopers, media and film plays an important role in justifying warfare and the consolidation of resources, monetary, human, or otherwise, behind the American imperial military project and the war on terror. The post-9/11 militarization of popular culture and civilian life meant movies glorifying war and military prowess, and movies that highlighted pleasure and fulfillment in technology and violence rather than in human connection and sexual intimacy needed to dominate our popular consciousness and take up space in our collective minds. As Lindsay Ellis states in Movies, Patriotism, and Cultural Amnesia, tracing pop culture's relationship to 9/11, she says, "The appropriation of 9/11 evoking imagery in big-budget action slaughterhouses like Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice has become something of a punchline in its shamelessness, but the pervasiveness of that imagery remains fairly constant when a film's budget allows. And these films make money because on some level, these images are what we, the viewing audience, want to see. Like a victim of a heinous assault returning to the scene of the crime, but viewing it only from a safe distance, we keep reliving the moment over and over, until finally we find some meaning. Is it any wonder, then, that the movie that launched the Marvel Cinematic Universe as we know it today came out during the height of our war with Iraq? Iron Man was released in May of 2008, and filming for it began in the early days of 2007. As Benedict writes, "Those perfect bodies exist only for the purpose of inflicting violence upon others. To have fun is to become weak, to let your team down, and to give the enemy a chance to win, like Thor did when he got fat in Avengers Endgame." Fat Thor. But it's not just that the cinematic landscape and film industry at large have shifted to leave little room for sex in film. The modes through which we consume such media have shifted as well. Our relationship with film, media, and art has changed as technologies have evolved, and indeed, the very nature of our existence in the world has shifted to an increasingly isolated and alienated one. As the unfettered market lurches forward, with the technology driving its impulses and makeup, the proliferation of technologies has led to an increasingly mediated, hyper-surveilled existence, as normal T.P. Talot discusses director Paul Verhoeven's work in relation to French cultural theorist, urbanist, architect, and aesthetic philosopher Paul Virillo. In Talot's piece, Verhoeven, Virillo, and Cinematic Derealization, he argues that the postmodern man, who we could all call now the capitalist realist, thanks to Mark Fisher, finds himself in a kind of constant cinematic reality cultivated by and inured to the technologies that have become quotidian and instrumental to our existence under late capitalism. In all cases, because of the distant, detached ways in which they promote our seeing, these technologies foster, as Virillo puts it, the accident of reality itself, a pervasive sense of derealization, and it is this derealization that removes us from an emotional, sensorial, corporeal engagement with that which we perceive. It's this derealization that has severed our desire and stomped out our appetite for media and art that implicates our participation on a bodily level, including most prominently the sex scene. In this derealized landscape, we can only engage with the world as a series of commodities, as products, as inputs into the steady stream of artifacts and images we consume, leaving the sensate experience of our understanding of these things completely out of the picture. Artifacts is used intentionally here, in the sense that complex emotional, physical, and psychic experiences and ideas, messy material and political realities, lose all of their constituent meaning and human implication within an overly mediated context and become mere signifiers of that which was formerly materially imperative. There is no need for the body, the soul, the heart. In this artificial environment, human senses seem far less important, precise, or even reliable. If the body has become irrelevant, if human connection has merely become a kind of mediated digital exchange of symbols, then it stands to reason that the appetite for the depiction of intensely corporeal experiences that break the viewer from this detached position where the body is suppressed, like a sex scene. Take, for example, the very specific example of the much discussed pool sex scene in Verhoeven's Showgirls, would become an allergy to a consuming public. It comes with no surprise, then, that a recurring cycle of discourse online is the question of the necessity, or as many argue, lack thereof, of the sex scene. One merely has to search the phrase "sex scene unnecessary" on Twitter to find countless results of posts and replies on the topic, often reaching incendiary tenors. Jacques Lacan's theories on schizophrenia provide an evocative aesthetic model for understanding the audience's aversion to the presence of sex scenes. As Frederick Jameson writes in Postmodernism in the Consumer Society, Lacanian schizophrenic is reduced to an experience of pure material signifiers, or in other words, a series of pure unrelated presence in time. When the consumer spectator encounters an image, an idea, a sound that goes beyond a mere signifier, they cannot make sense of it. In fact, they refuse to. You see this online all the time. Trying to have conversations with people, you say one thing, you just assume they understand, they've inferred the meaning you're trying to convey. They don't. Everything is so literal, you can't have a nuanced conversation with anybody anymore, especially online. It is a revolving door of commodification and alienation, commodification of ideas, of bodies, of feelings, and alienation from ourselves, from our own bodies, from others. The way we consume and talk about films and art in this hyper-mediated environment, largely on individualized and individuated digital platforms, here we are, kids, has not only impacted how that media and art is made, the modes of production, but also what types of media and art get prioritized, what gets made at all. Can it be talked about in 240 characters? Can it be distilled down into an easily digestible, uncomplicated binary deciphered in a millisecond or a scroll? Or better yet, can it be made into a meme? In this sense, it's not surprising that a large portion of Gen Z and millennials are the ones primarily expressing their aversion to the presence of sex scenes in films with discourse on social media. They are the ones for whom time has always come ready cut into digital microslices. Indeed, teenagers process capital's image-dense data very effectively without any need to read. Slogan recognition is sufficient to navigate the net mobile magazine informational plane. The constant connection to the matrix, as it were, to a mediated existence, has borne a kind of puritanism that comes with the knowledge that you are constantly being surveilled, documented, that you are constantly in public in some way, being perceived, even when you're in your private space. This is what distinguishes current youth from generations past. Just the sense that you can't opt out at any point because your social life is going on at all times, whether or not you're even around. The unregulated market forces that drive late capitalism depend entirely on the process of turning all acts, all aspects of experience, into a consumer exercise. They depend entirely on our willingness to suppress the body, the very material nature of our existence in the world and our connection to others, and assign all cultural objects and experiences a monetary value, effectively emptying out the possibility of bodily implication and engagement from our experience with art and media. There is no place for the sex scene here, especially for the kind of ecstatic corporeal sex scenes of the erotic thrillers of the 90s we're filled with. Fisher is invaluable in our understanding on this point. In the conversion of practices and rituals into merely aesthetic objects, the beliefs of previous cultures are objectively ironized and transformed into artifacts. And all that's left is the consumer spectator, trudging through the ruins and the relics. This turn from belief to aesthetics, from engagement to spectatorship, is held to be one of the virtues of capitalist realism. If we are anything at all anymore, we are mostly only conspicuous consumers, and our position as such necessitates that all we interact with must exist as a commodity. And the more determined our existences become on consumption, the more isolated and individuated our experiences become. Conspicuous consumption has come to replace the same kind of release and euphoria that comes with an orgasm. The plane of consumerism is where we experience all things now. Why engage in the messy matter of physical desire at all when my body has become a commodity itself that I can display and sell on Instagram and TikTok? Benedict again illuminates this twisted shift perfectly. A body is no longer a holistic system. It is not the vehicle through which we experience joy and pleasure during our brief time in the land of the living. It is not a home to live in and be happy. It too is a collection of features: six-pack, thigh gap, cum gutters. And those features exist not only to make our lives more comfortable, but to increase the value of our assets. Our bodies are investments, which must always be optimized to bring us what exactly? Some vague sense of better living? Is a life without bread objectively better than a life with it? When we were children, did we dream of counting every calorie and logging every step? Now we are perfect islands of emotional self-reliance, and it is seen as embarrassing and codependent to want to be touched. There is no promise of intimacy. Like our heroes in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, like Rico and Dizzy and all the other infantry and Starship Troopers, we are horny only for annihilation. Goddamn. As we float astronautically through an increasingly mediated world, ever detached from the corporeal and emotional realities of not only of others, but of ourselves, we seek pleasure only in the form of the pristine spectacle of consumption, the ecstatic high that comes not from the touch of another human, but the dopamine rush of a retweet, the serotonin hit that comes with recognizing a character or symbol from your childhood, the euphoria of knowing a thing immediately and uncomplicatedly, the bliss of having the world at your fingertips and being able to curate an experience where you are never challenged, never forced into the discomfort of engaging actively, never shaken from your position as a passive consumer. No, there's no need for sex scenes here, folks. I mean, it's true. When I was, in junior high school, I had my first girlfriend. We couldn't wait to get into her bedroom after school, and we'd spend hours and hours and hours there. Sometimes we'd watch her dad's bootleg videotape of Star Wars, but then we couldn't wait, and we would spend hours. I can't even imagine people be like, after 5 minutes, let's go back and watch whatever. Let's go play a video game. I mean, my young self was motivated by movies and sex when I was a kid. That was it, man. That was the thing. And I loved my job working at video stores when video stores were new, and I made lots of money, and I got movies and girls. That's what it was for the whole time. I don't see that at all anymore. This shifting landscape of increasingly technological influence on our hyper-mediated daily lives has functionally changed the way we engage with media and art. But what is the emotional motivation to recede into our caverns of consumption? What are we running from? What are we seeking to escape? You know, a lot of people talk about, when they get mad about Martin Scorsese or Jodie Foster talking about the different kinds, the fact that superhero movies dominate the landscape. This is what they're talking about. You know, they came from a cinema. They came up in a time when movies were literally about humanity. How do we get closer to one another? How do we touch one another, both figuratively and emotionally, and literally? That's what cinema was about. That's what art was about. And I think when they're talking about superheroes, it's not just that all the money is being sucked up by superhero movies, but superhero movies are inherently movies where we watch and we are distancing ourselves because superheroes are not concerned with our daily lives. We're watching purely fantasy stories. And I lament this as well. I mean, I much prefer movies, you know, I'll go back and I think Almost Famous is one of my top 10 favorite movies, the long version of all time. But that's a movie that I relate to. You know, as a human being, the experience that our young child, following his dreams, goes through, and the transformation of his life, and what it's like for him to fall in love with a woman that doesn't see the same things that, even in herself, that he sees in her. And the movies that I love are not necessarily, as much as I like the MCU, those are not my favorite movies. And when people are talking about and criticizing the superhero movie, they're not criticizing the superhero genre per se. They're criticizing the fact what we watch. We have no emotional connection to it other than the fact that, hey, it might make us feel good, but there's not a whole lot that's plumbing into the depths of our souls. And I say that as somebody who loves science fiction, fantasy, and horror cinema. But they're not the movies I return to again and again and again. The current state of cultural and material decline. You know what? I'm going to stop there for a second because I want to keep going on with this article, but I haven't even looked at what you guys are saying. And I'm hoping somebody has something to say. And there certainly are. As a matter of fact, there are a lot. Okay, here we go. Sadhu says May, December has instantly become my number one of the year. Well, I need to see that Todd Haynes new movie. I can't wait to see that movie. I don't know if it's streaming. I'll go see it in the theater, but that's great. Sadhu says The Handmaiden, one of the best erotic thrillers. Amen. The Handmaiden's a Korean film. If you haven't seen it, it is a banger. It's also beautiful. Sadhu, you have good taste. I agree. Jay Bling says, I should take a shot for every time you say everyone nowadays is talking about identities, but no one is talking about fucking. You should. It's true. But they aren't. You know, it's funny. I mean, that's what's really interesting to me about all this talk about identity. Again, everyone's talking about who they are. They all want to be recognized. Please see me the way I want to be seen. Okay. But where's the connection with other people? Now that you're being acknowledged for who and what you are, what are you doing to interact and engage with others? That's what I find strange about the whole thing. About, it's an inversion of when I was a kid, I really wasn't too concerned with how people saw me. Sure, I mean, I wanted people to like me and all that, but I was more interested in going out into the world and seeing them. What's out there? You know, I was always like, we got to go here and we got to go here. We got to go see the arts. You know, whether you're going to the record store to get music, whether you're going to see a concert, whether you're going to see a play, I wanted to see the world. I wasn't interested in the world seeing me. The world saw me when I was out interacting with the world. And that was, I think, the big difference, at least that I've seen, is that we were out, you know, all the people I knew, the people I grew up with, we were always going out somewhere, going to do something, going to experience something. And interact. And then what we would do is if somebody's parents were gone, we'd go to their house on a Friday or Saturday night. And what would we do? We'd interact with each other. Or we'd go out and come back and interact with each other. It's a different thing. I mean, I don't think anyone we got to know people through interacting with them. And we interacted with our friends by going out and doing things, as opposed to saying, look at me, look at my identity. I want you to recognize me as this. Well, we learn by doing, as Kirk would say. I just think it's a different thing. But yes, Jay Bling, I do say that. Scott Bartholomew, says Revenge, 1990, with Tony Scott also directed that, with Costner and Madeline Stowe. That is a steamy movie that has some great erotic sex scenes. Madeline Stowe, it's really funny because I think she's still married to Brian Benben from Dream On, Martin Tupper. Dream On was a lot of boobs in that show, but Dream On was a great early, I think it was HBO, right? It wasn't Showtime, it was HBO. I love that show, and Madeline Stowe, I always thought it was funny, she's married to Brian Benben. And I think they're still married, which is pretty cool. Madeline Stowe, man. I really like Revenge, although it's hard, man. That movie's hardcore, especially what happens to poor Madeline Stowe. Yeesh. But yeah, I'm a big fan of that movie. Darth Maul says, "Hey Rob, where can I get a 4K Blu-ray disc of Super Bowl 49 at?" Why you got to do that? Why you got to bring that up all the time? Do you have to? I don't know. I don't think you could yet. I don't know. Narf sends in a tip and says, "Forget Kang. Imagine the moment in Godzilla X Kong where Kong uses his gauntlet arm and says, 'I am inevitable.' And then he reboots the MCU, which ends the multiverse of crap. Yay." Yeah, I don't know. It kind of looks like that, doesn't it? Craziness. Anonymous says, "There's not enough porn, Rob. Put a chick in it and make it gay." That's, of course, a reference to South Park's Pandaverse. Man, that was genius. So funny. The Richards Art sends in a super chat, just a super chat. Doesn't but the Richard, thank you for that. Thank you for supporting that. Anonymous says, "There are 3 genders: male, female, and the mentally ill. Go change my mind." Well, hang on. There is increasing evidence to support, and look, I've always said this. I've always said that when it comes to things like I've met people in the world, in my life, I've met trans people that the same is true of I had a friend that I knew my whole life. I knew he was gay before he even came out. I knew he was gay. He was naturally gay from the time he was born. It just took him 24 years to figure it out. But I think the same is true. Eventually, we don't have the technology now, but there are some evidence to suggest that I don't find it difficult to believe that a trans person is born and his brain or her brain is physically in the wrong body. There's not. I don't see that that's hard to believe at all. And I think that eventually we'll be able to know that. We'll be able to prove that that's true. And I think it is true. The trans people that I've known, the trans women and trans men that I've known, absolutely, I believe that I have a trans female, a trans. See, the funny thing is, I think of her as a woman. I know she's trans, but to me, she's a woman. I know for a fact that while she was born in the body of a man, she's a woman. Now, does that make me crazy? I don't know. Do I have any scientific evidence for that? No. But I can tell you, as a human being, I know it's true. I know it's true. And eventually, one day, they'll be able to prove that that is an actual thing, that actually does happen. Do I think that's true of everybody? No. I think there's all different kinds. There's different spectrums. It's all. But I do believe that people, just like LGBTQ people, you can't ever convince me that homosexuality isn't natural, because all my gay friends were born that way. It was not a choice. They were born that way. They are naturally occurring. And I think that's true. We're going to find that out about a lot of trans people. We just don't have the technology yet to prove it. But we will. We will. But I don't think that's true of everybody. Just like I don't think anything is true of everybody. But I think that human beings are interesting. You know, and it makes sense to me that people could get more testosterone or more estrogen or whatever. Why is that so difficult to believe? And that's why I think it's important that people have a voice, and they are treated with great respect, and they have communities that they can rely on, and we should support and lift people up. There's no reason why we can't do that. However, when certain ideology is starting to be imposed on other people, that's when things start to get dicey. And I think that's when we also have to, everything has to be, there's got to be common sense. I was talking about, for instance, education. I believe education's like the movie rating system. When you're in elementary school, you should be watching things that are G-rated. And as you get older, as you get into junior high and high school, then you can see PG, PG-13, and eventually R-rated material. I don't have a problem. I have no problem. As a child, I would not want to have, as a kid, I would not want to have been exposed to a bunch of adult material before I was capable of understanding it. I have no problem with that. I don't think that anybody should have a problem with that. Let kids grow up and learn things on their own time. Why is it that we have to accelerate and teach them all about these things that'll make their young lives more complex? Why are we foisting adult concerns on our kids? We shouldn't do that. I mean, ask yourself, would you take, if an 8-year-old kid, would you take an 8-year-old kid to an R-rated movie? I would not take an 8-year-old to see The Exorcist. I wouldn't do it. It's not fair to them. And ultimately, it's not going to do any good to take an 8-year-old kid to see The Exorcist. It just isn't. And I wouldn't do that. And I think that live your life by the movie rating system, if that makes any sense. Sonny Dominguez says, an affair to remember and 9.5 weeks have things in common to me. Swinging bachelors whose attraction, unlike they've known. Their egos have a hard time dealing with it. Tragically romantic, in my humble opinion. Bet they made their ladies squirt. Sonny Dominguez is the king of that. Well, yeah, I mean, look, I love 9.5 weeks, and it's a tragic romance. But yeah, you've got this captain of industry. He's used to getting whatever he wants. He falls in love with this extraordinary woman, and this extraordinary woman is not going to play his games, is not going to be dominated by him. And at the end of the day, he probably really loves her, but he's unwilling to give up who he is to try and meet her halfway. I love the movie. Love the way it looks. And yeah, I think you're right about that. And the same is true of An Affair to Remember. Even though very different movies. One's a lot more puritanical than the other. But I think you're absolutely right with that, Sonny. That's a really interesting. Now you make me. I own both of those movies. Now I want to go watch An Affair to Remember and watch 9.5 weeks as a double feature. I never would have thought about putting those movies together, but now you've done that for me. That's why I love the Post-Geek Singularity community, because you people, you guys are great. Nicomedes Santiago says, great stream tonight, not just because you're singing my tune. Tonight afterwards, I'm going to pull out a crisp copy of an obscure B movie off the shelf and enjoy it. Sad now, it feels like defiance. Yeah, I mean, it's really odd. It's so bizarre. It's so bizarre that we are. I mean, I understand a lot of it, again, came from the male gaze. I get a lot of that. But look, I want to see erotic thrillers made by women. More of that, please. 1001 Johnny says, I'm outing myself with this one. With how popular anime is, might I suggest the Ero anime hentai has risen in popularity too? Ero anime might have sex scenes, but there is actually story. Hey man, I've watched Bible Black. I'm with you. Usually inward monologues of characters questioning their selfishness, etc. Yeah, look, I mean, I all that hentai stuff is crazy. But it's not done in a vacuum. Although I would say I'd be very curious to see what women think of the hentai genre. I've talked to some people that it turns them on. But it's interesting. Norwegian Kryptonian says, seems to me people need more endorphins. That's right. That's why Prince has a song called Endorphin Machine. I agree. They do. Jason S. says, Rob, that's crayon science. We have technology right now that will say whether you are a man or a woman. It's all based on DNA, not your state of mind. We can DNA test a dead body to see what their sex is. Their state of mind has nothing to do with it. Well, hold on. Here's the thing. Brain chemistry in male and female brains, there is differences in that brain chemistry. What I am positing is that why is it so hard to believe that a human being is born a male human body with male DNA and all that stuff is male, but the mind, the brain, is the brain of a female. Now that's structural. Sure, you've got the DNA, but maybe you got a more whatever you needed, and so your brain is literally has the brain chemistry of a female. I believe that's totally true. Sure, is your DNA always going to be male? Yes. But it's not hard for me to believe that the brain chemistry that you have is the brain chemistry that a female has. So in your mind, it's the same thing that I was talking about early on about David Cronenberg's movies, in that we are creatures of intellect, and in our minds, our bodies can decide to revolt against us at any one time. Cancers, those kinds of things. Now, I'm saying that, do I know this is true for a fact? No. But it wouldn't surprise me based on the people that I've met in my life and the fact that I think it's a distinct possibility. There are all kinds of different mutations within human bodies. Eye color being one. Hair color being another. So it isn't out of the realm of possibility that I think one day that we'll find out that people, and I think there's a lot of people that might not have gender dysphoria that also, I think there's a difference in there too. I think people that really have gender dysphoria, real gender dysphoria, might be naturally occurring. And there's a reason why they have it. I don't know if that's true, but I would be willing to bet that one day medical technology will be able to acknowledge, yes, it's true. You were in fact born with the brain chemistry of a woman. So as you grow older, you're going to feel gender dysmorphia, body dysmorphia. That's not hard for me to believe. Is it true? Don't know. I don't think we have the technology to say one way or the other. I've read studies that say that there are things that maybe point in that direction, but I don't know. But I would definitely, based on my own experience with people that I know that are trans, I actually believe that those people are in fact people that were a woman that's actually born in the body of a man, or a man that was actually born in the body of a woman. From my own personal experience, I believe that to be true. And can I prove it? No. Do I think all people that say that they're trans or non-binary are that way? No, I don't. But I think that there are people that truly are that way. And we will eventually be able to figure it out. We can't now. But the thing is, I'm open to the possibility. And I don't think that there's anything wrong with allowing people that have body dysmorphia. Why should we not support them? We support everybody else who wants to get help. If you suffer from depression, nobody gets on your case because you're depressed. So why not help all people to try and be their best selves? I don't have a problem with that. And I think that we should, to be compassionate and kind and an open civilization, we should do that. And we should always be seeking answers and striving for that. I do think, though, that there's a lot going on that has nothing to do with that in terms of identity politics and politics of all different kinds. That's a different subject matter. And I'm not saying, by the way, you call it crayon science. I can't prove it. There's no science that proves that. So it's not science at all. It's just something that I wouldn't be surprising to me if it's true, or if it turns out to be true. The Richard says, hey, dude, thinking of Eros, I believe you have a story on Marion Kiss of the Beast. Perhaps your thoughts on Dance with the Devil, Rosie Perez. Props to any footage of Linnea Quigley as well. I sent you 2 erotic horror sketches on Facebook today. Oh, I'll have to go back and get them. But now let's jump back in. Let me just make sure I'm caught up with, so that's tips and super chats, but I want to make sure I haven't missed anyone else's stuff here. Tom Jr. Jackson says, great show tonight, Rob. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Medicated movie reviews became a member of the channel. Thank you. I appreciate that. So I think we are indeed caught up. Let me jump back into this article. The current state of cultural and material decline plays an important role in the shift toward Puritanism in media and art, in consumer appetite and the political posture of the state. That is to say, with the compounding crises, we are bombarded with everything from climate disaster to rampant racialized police violence to genocide as part of our daily lives under late capitalism, the need for escape, and indeed the need for that escape to be completely unchallenging and non-confrontational, has become imperative. Moreover, as control over our own material realities becomes less and less feasible, the last lone place we believe we can exercise agency is within the landscape of that which we consume. This has resulted in the consuming public approaching all media and art with a moral imperative. That which we consume must be perfectly virtuous, sanitized of all problematic or complicated ideas and depictions, because it has become the stand-in for our very realities, our very political action as citizens, and consuming has become our praxis. This is another factor in the disappearance of sex scenes and those films that are more frequently featured such scenes in the 80s and 90s, namely erotic thrillers, are finding less and less space and credibility, capital generation, in Hollywood. As noted by Karina Longworth, who has dedicated several episodes of her podcast, You Must Remember This, by the way, to the topic of sex in the 80s. I disagree with some of her podcasts. I'd love to have her come on. I don't know Karina Longworth, but You Must Remember This is a great podcast. But her look back at the 80s, I don't always agree with. As noted by Karina Longworth, who has dedicated several episodes of her podcast, You Must Remember This, to the topic of sex in the 80s and 90s Hollywood cinema, she says, I think there is a lot of fear in the culture right now about dealing with all of the issues surrounding sex between men and women. We've never come close to resolving most of the imbalances and inequalities that charge a lot of these movies of the 80s and 90s, and I think we're uncomfortable with the lack of progress. I also think that the best of these movies are somewhat ambiguous as to what constitutes good and bad and normal and not normal, which is true to human nature, but doesn't jibe with the strain in our culture that wants to pretend that anything they don't approve of or feel comfortable with doesn't exist. The desire to exclusively engage with media and art made by unproblematic artists is a direct result of Americans viewing media consumption as an inherently political act because that is the supreme promise of Western prosperity and the religion of consumerism, and because it's seemingly all that's left. We've been stripped and socialized out of any real political energy and agency. Our ability to consume is the only thing remaining that's ours in late capitalism, and as a result, it's become a stand-in, or perhaps the sole defining quality of, every aspect of being alive today. Consuming is activism. It's love. It's thinking. It's sex. It's fill in the blank. When the act of consuming is all you have left, and indeed the only thing society tells you is valuable and meaningful, the act must necessarily be a moral one, which is why people send themselves down manic spirals deciding what or who is problematic or not, because for us, the stakes are that high right now. It's amazing to me that I go on Twitter. If I wanted to, I could say in one sentence, I could trigger somebody, and then suddenly I will spend days arguing with people that tell me that they hate me, that I've suddenly turned into a right-wing bigot, an ist, a phobe, call it what you want, when all I'm really looking for is interesting conversation. But if somebody doesn't like your position, it means they don't like you. And they're equating your position with who you are. They're taking it's amazing to me that I might have 10,000 different ideas about something, But if I espouse one of those ideas and somebody disagrees with me, that one idea becomes the entire basis of who and what I am online, which is wild to me. It's wild because I've done lots of things where you can go back years. You can see my documentary work. You can see my film work. You can see my YouTube work. You can listen to, if you wanted to. I've spoken online for thousands of hours. This is the 908th episode of this show, which means there's probably at least 2,000 or 3,000 hours of this show. There's Midnight Musings, Midnight Metal, whatever. But I say one thing on Twitter that somebody disagrees with, they and their friends will, especially about Star Trek, they will come after me, and suddenly fuck that guy. I made a comment about, and I didn't even know this, but I was talking about the fact that there's a certain aspect to our lives where we would like to be, speaking of sex, we would like to be objectified by our significant others. That there's an idea like, if you're in love with somebody and you love them, just like your significant other, like whoever your significant other, I guarantee you, at some point, wants that your significant other wants you to objectify them in a sexual sort of way, desire them, want them in a lustful manner. I'm a dude, I'm straight, so my significant other, Elizabeth, wants me to crave her. Wants me to want to tear off her underwear with my teeth. Wants me to have her breasts in my mouth. She wants that, to know that I have that desire. That do I know she's a beautiful person? Yes. Do I know that she's a talented artist? Yes. All those things are true. But she also wants to occasionally, not all the time, she wants me to see her as a partner and as a significant other and as my best friend. All those things are true. But she also wants me to lust after her as well. Just like we want to be, like I want her to feel the opposite, the same way, to lust after me, to want my dick, or you want that. I made a crack like that, and I was trying to, and I think that, and somebody, whoever heard this from a pretty prominent Star Trek website, somebody's wife heard me say this, and in her mind, all I said was, Rob Burnett believes that people want to be objectified. That's it. The context of what I was saying, how I just explained it to you out there, I wasn't saying that, yes, everybody wants to be objectified. No, there's a nuance with that. I'm talking about the objectification is you want people to lust after you if you're in a relationship with them. And I want to lust after the person but that's not the only thing. That's just a facet of a relationship. But I say this, and because people always want to, first of all, they want to be mad, especially when I say things. There's people in the Star Trek world, people want to be mad at me, trust me. But when I say something like that, it becomes, Rob Burnett believes that women want to be objectified. That's the dumbest thing in the world. And that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that is that's a part of someone's personality, specifically for the person that. And also, let's face it, you know what? Everybody wants to look good. You do. There's that element of you want to be seen. You want to be looked at. You want people to want you. I mean, and to say that a part of that, is that all you want? No. Am I saying that women just want to be objectified? No. Am I saying men just want to be objectified? No. But there is a part of everybody in their relationships or their lives that they would like to be objectified by somebody who just has an incredible just lust after them. That's not all they want. But somebody will go online and say, Rob Burnett says people want to be objectified, as if, and make it sound like that's all I think about them. I fucking hate that. And that kind of discourse is exactly what they're talking here. Talot's reflection is again helpful here. In a derealized existence, completely untethered from one another, but forever tethered to the digital information magazine of faux reality, we seek anchorage in our ability to judge that which we perceive, that which we consume, those commodities that for us have become the last bastion of political and personal expression. In the liminal position which we find ourselves in such a derealized context, film suggests our need to find an anchor, a posture, and ultimately a judgment we, rather than our media, can make on such a problematic world. The consumer spectator is convinced that the very act of judging is what proves one's participation in society, and moreover the certitude of our own individual virtue, separate and apart from others who are ostensibly heathens if they're in disagreement with us. Art, media, film, all commodities, in fact, are there to affirm our moral rectitude. We believe, not to challenge it. They must serve as an expression of who we are. Fisher cites Zizek on this matter, noting that capitalist ideology in general consists precisely in the overvaluing of belief, in the sense of inner subjective attitude, at the expense of the beliefs we exhibit and externalize in our behavior. This is why demands for a subjective moral purity, which we believe to be objective, of all that we consume is mandatory for us. Sex, desire, sexuality, therefore, is drained of its impact, detached from its ideological and sensorial consequence, and turned into one more overly determined spectacle with which we are invited to watch with detached interest and without fear that any disturbing ideological questions might arise. It should be noted that discussion around sex in movies is not a new one, and indeed, even when the erotic thriller genre was at its peak, films like Basic Instinct and Showgirls were still somewhat subversive, transgressive, and even anti-establishment, and were met with hostility, critically, and by audiences as a result, despite being prolific and profitable. This certainly speaks to our puritanical origins as Americans and the societal shame we have around sex, particularly in public or artistic settings. But in the 80s and 90s, there was still a broader desire to give in to the very natural urges and desires we all have as sexual beings. In Kurt Schiller's incredible piece for Blood Knife magazine, Suck, Fuck, Kill, the psychosexual nightmare of the erotic thriller, he illuminates. And this is where the visual explicitness of the erotic thriller comes into play. Even at the height of their popularity, contemporary reviews frequently lambasted these films for their more gratuitous tendencies, desperate, sweaty, and above all, prolonged sex scenes that play out in feverish permutations and exotic locales. But it is exactly this over-the-top eroticism that allows the genre to deeply connect with audiences. Just like the protagonists of Call Me and Fatal Attraction find themselves simultaneously tantalized and terrified of their own sexual appetites, the audience is similarly left both titillated and alienated. Like the characters on screen, we are both caught up in the passion and terrified at the potential consequences and ramifications. To most movie-going audiences, sex in movies now feel imposed. Its mere presence feels like an affront, a confrontation, which is precisely what a filmmaker like Paul Verhoeven is after in movies like Showgirls or more recently Benedetta, and precisely what audiences are allergic to, which is very precisely why he does what he does. Shouldn't sex be a provocation? In 2022, The New Yorker organized a roundtable of critics tasked with examining the absence of sex scenes in mainstream Hollywood cinema. Paradoxically, despite The New Yorker's critics expressing a longing for sex scenes in films, their stance is not too dissimilar from that of those audiences who reject such scenes today. For example, on the sex in Verhoeven's Benedetta, Alexandra Schwartz says, "It felt superimposed, like a point was being made rather than it being anything integral to the movie." Words that seem to confirm what Verhoeven has asserted about the drift toward puritanism in American cinema today, and its indifference or impatience toward the kind of stories and images that have always interested him throughout his career. In this regard, it is not surprising that his latest work, and the focus of much of the New Yorker's critics' ire, Benedetta, is a French film distributed in the United States by a French media corporation. Verhoeven had to go to Europe to make his art. The hostility within the New Yorker's roundtable is continued as they try to parse out what the point of the sex scenes in HBO's Euphoria, created by Sam Levinson, is. lamenting that it feels again like the show is simply being exhibitionist, simply saying, look at how far we can go. The issue is that the presence of sex is not that easily digestible and sanitized for these viewers. Sex that cannot be swallowed whole or viewed as morally correct in some way is therefore automatically seen as anti-art, as without having meaning, as alienating. At the same time, these critics talk about how they can't look away from the sex scenes in Euphoria, which reveals to us that there is clearly something working viscerally about these scenes that the viewers have become unaccustomed to, so that they meet with suspicion rather than interest and curiosity. This perspective is one that can be applied broadly to any element of film and TV that directly engages a viewer and focuses them to actively participate in what they're watching, rather than just passively swallow it without feeling or thinking. These scenes are met with contempt. And here we find the crux of this puritanical stance towards sex in films and media, which is the assertion that sex cannot simply exist in film or TV, that it must serve some greater purpose in order to be considered art and not porn, that there must be some higher political and ideological meaning behind it, that sex depicted simply for pleasure, the pleasure of the characters and the pleasure of the audience, or sex depicted to provoke, to stimulate, to confront viewers is inherently anti-art and automatically seen as problematic. Doreen St. Felix from The New Yorker goes on, the question is, was that the only thing you did? Sometimes Euphoria makes me want to use a word that I basically never use in daily life, which is sexist. It seems so often that its interest in awakening the figure of the provocateur, which I think is totally legit and reasonable, so much of our culture right now is really earnest and desexed. The show has made these women really retrograde figures. What's retrograde is arguing that women, or anyone for that matter, having sex and being overtly sexual for any reason or no reason at all, even and especially when they are the ones being agent about their sexuality, is somehow retrograde. The automatic assumption that sex, sexuality, desire, bodily experience, and expression as a major part of a woman or any person's life, and perhaps core to the understanding of her, is not valid in and of itself and must instead serve some kind of moral or political purpose, is a vehement expression of this puritanical stance, and furthermore supports the broader capitalist perspective that sex only exists for procreation and the production of new workers, that sex for pleasure, and indeed pleasure itself, is inherently anti-capital. These critics and audiences today, generally speaking, are only interested in sanitized, moralized, and ideally completely non-controversial experiences with their media and art, an experience they readily commodify into an easily digestible opinion or tweet, meme, or headline, to exist as an artifact online, one that's representative and reflexive of their personal political and moral ideologies. They want a film, just like any other commodity they consume, to stand as a totem, a badge for their specific belief system, rather than challenge it, or not serve as representative at all. While these critics claim to be clamoring for the resurgence of the sex scene, they're in fact affirming the perspective that it is relative of its demise and an audience's aversion to sex in film and media more broadly. I would say that it's absolutely true. For instance, I mean, if you watch Euphoria, those sex scenes, while titillating, are a downer usually. There's not a whole lot of eroticism going on there. I mean, I'll flat out say it. When I was a kid, some of the most joyous, some of the most memorable, some of the most euphoric experiences I had were I found in the arms of my girlfriends or girls that I was with or knew, or they were incredible. They were they were amazing experience. I have amazing memories of growing up that way. And it was because one, I just loved it. There was nothing I liked more than being in the arms of a beautiful woman. And it was fantastic. And it wasn't wham bam thank you ma'am. It was getting to know a person and getting to know what they wanted and what they wanted to know what you wanted, and it was all good. Nowadays it feels like it's not good because everywhere you turn, the depiction of sex is either commodified or it's shown as being something icky or undesirable. And that's a weird thing to me. That was not my experience growing up as a human being. And it's lately quite odd. But yeah, I do. And the weird thing that the reality of sex has been bled out of our entertainment, and it's bizarre. Now, if I come out in favor of someone's ideology or identity, that's great, but it's from a very distancing point of view. I mean, I'm interested in okay, so you want me to recognize your identity. My question then is, once I've done that, how then does that affect the world at large? What is being recognized for being who and what you are? Is that going to make your life better? What are you going to do? Are you just going to, with the knowledge that you're now accepted? I mean, what about the fucking? Let's get into that. And there was a joy in all of that, and I feel like in this weird, as long as you've got all the violence you can handle, and as long as your identity is recognized, the love and the erotic power of being alive, when you're missing out on that, you're missing out on life. People who are erotically charged are energized. They're not thinking about what people are out there thinking of them. When you're erotically charged in your own life, when you have somebody that you can be erotically charged with, you focus on that. And I think I know that we're missing that in our culture because people are too concerned, especially on social media, with they themselves being recognized for who and what they are. What does it matter? Go out and get that erotic charge in your life. Go find somebody that you can turn off your social media and spend some quality time together. You know what I'm saying? Naomi Fry continued. Let me go back to this and say, while those critics claim to be clamoring for the resurgence of the sex scene, they're in fact affirming the perspective that is relative of its demise and of audiences' aversion to sex in film and media more broadly. Naomi Fry continues, they're all idiots. I mean, they're not idiots in terms of their baseline intelligence, but they're all body and sensation and impulse. And arguably, that's what you need for a teen show, maybe, but it's also what you need for porn. You watch porn for a reason, and it's not to watch people talk about books. This is the grand summation of the morally conservative posture that the proliferation of mediated experiences and the market making of all aspects of our existence has reinforced. That sex, experiences of the body, both their depiction and our bodily engagement, our emotional and sensorial engagement as viewers with film and media, that impulse and desire are automatically seen as less than, as unintelligent, as unworthy of depiction, as unworthy of our attention outside a pornographic setting. And then comes the matter at the heart of it all. And as Vincent Cunningham of The New Yorker asks, what is this sex for? And to make people horny is not enough. So you have to stylize and sort of authorize the act. Do we? Or do we just require that in order for it to feel more comfortable to consume? Do we require that sex be authorized, like the auteur, authorized and statement making so that it can serve as a ready hologram of our own personal moralized beliefs? What if the provocation is the point? What if the lack of a moral aestheticization of sex is the point? Aestheticization? I think it's aestheticization. What if the stirring of desire and curiosity in the catatonic consumer spectator is the point? What if the expression and experience of pleasure on its own terms is the point? Is that not a worthy exercise, particularly amid such a hollowed out, highly medicated and surveilled existence? An existence where we are thoroughly deprived of pleasure and self-expression? Where it has become harder and harder to simply survive, let alone experience true, deep, unmediated pleasure and ecstasy that is not tied to some consumer act? Sex is a part of life, a very material part of our humanity, our experience with the real. So why shouldn't it be in films? Sex and the sex scene is a place where provocation, pleasure for pleasure's sake, desire, curiosity, messiness, nuance, spectacle, and equally banality and all of life's ambiguities, beauties, and perversions can exist all at once. It requires creation and engagement beyond passive consumption and reflexive, flattened regurgitation. It's fitting, then, that we find ourselves back where we started, with Paul Verhoeven, the arbiter of satire and confrontational cinema, the director who reminds us that he and we can go there, as Alexandra Schwartz chided. The director who works against the commodification of sex and violence, against the commodification of the entirety of our lived experiences, by forcing us to confront the very spectacle of commodification in the first place. Paul Verhoeven, in doing so, asserts the necessity of resisting those market impulses that seek to destroy the experience and relevance of the body, that seek to render our bodies as blunt instruments, as mere tools for capital generation. In movies like Basic Instinct, Showgirls, and Benedetta, Paul Verhoeven refuses to offer us a sanitized, detached act made up of a series of signifiers, but instead shows us the messiness of our existence, a fully realized confrontation with the ideological and material constraints under which we live. He calls attention to the absurd ugliness inherent in the commodification of our bodies and our sensuality. He is, in this way, serving as a forcing mechanism for us to confront our own feelings and desires we may want to otherwise avoid. And if he's doing so within the very mediums we turn to for escape from those frictions. And I'll tell you something. Speaking of Verhoeven, watch Turkish Delight. It stars Rutger Hauer. It's an early film of his from the early 70s. Watch The Fourth Man and watch Spetters, because he certainly doesn't flinch away from sex in those films, but especially Turkish Delight, which is about an obsessive sexual love affair between Rutger Hauer and Monique Van de Ven. And it is fucking hot as fuck. And you should all watch it. It's great. You should watch Fourth Man, too. That'll blow your mind. Tillot describes Verhoeven's impulses expressed in Starship Troopers with an understanding that one could apply more broadly to the project of his films in general as intent on exaggerating its defects, its conventions, its very lures, in order to throw us into a state of irresolution and force us to explore the premises from which violence, sex, pleasure, pain, and our cinematic visions of it proceed. But here's the crux. Why does any of this matter? What's lost when movies just become a series of memeable one-liners and action scenes that can be distilled down into a GIF? What's lost when the necessary implications of the audience in the experience of viewing a film is removed, and we become merely passive consumers of moving images that stir nothing in us, that don't engage our bodies, our hearts, our minds, or shake us from our late capitalist catatonia? Why does it matter that we now only interact with trauma narratives through prepackaged IP nuggets delivered to us neatly in a series like WandaVision or the Halloween franchise? What's lost when the sex scene disappears from our movies? When the very presence of sexual desire and bodily expression incites revulsion? What's lost is our connection to one another, beyond the fetters of capitalism, indeed the very thing that makes us human. What's lost is our sense of the real, the visceral and radical experiences that Verhoeven's Hollywood films, even and especially through the persistence and abundance of sex scenes, were dedicated to recovering. All of which today's cinema is inevitably without. What's lost is the last thing that stands between us and the system that forever seeks to turn us into nothing more than another product. That's this article. I thought it was a banger. I wanted to share it with you, and I agree. I agree with that. So let's bring eroticism back into our lives. Let's bring the sex scenes back to cinema that have meaning, that have frisson, that are titillating, that are truly feel like you can watch the connection between two characters, and it's amazing. Yeah. Let's see. There's a lot of Scott Bartholomew says the aerobics scene with Crusher and Troy in Next Generation was absolutely erotic. Well, yes, it was. It was. It's true. And also because it was atypical. You saw them out of uniform. It was very. It's really funny. There was. It was on Showtime. I think it was on Showtime. It was called Aerobicize or something like that. It was just. It was women doing aerobics. This is early cable stuff, but it was shot in such a way that it was the most erotic angles that they could possibly pick. I mean, it was shameless. It was shameless, but it was hilarious. It was hilarious to watch. But, hey, the promise when you're with a partner that wants to be with you, because it is what you wish to do. There's nothing better. And to find that, to know what it's like to be seeking that experience with another person, that's what drives you. I know men are simple. When you find a partner, whatever partner you want, but when you find that partner that isn't afraid to touch you the way you like to be touched or do things to you that you hadn't even figured out you liked in the first place, when you have that, when that person has done that to you, there is nothing that's more powerful. There's nothing more powerful than craving that. And let me tell you, therein lies the beginnings of a great erotic thriller. And it's great. Jason Webster says, Godzilla -1 set a new record for 2023's largest opening for a foreign movie. That's true. That's great to know. It takes with all the great foreign films that are being made these days, it takes Godzilla to get American audiences back into the theater, which, to be honest, is a little depressing. As much as I love Godzilla, but I mean, hell, man, I have a shelf full of Japan's pinky violence movies from the 70s. Go watch those. Those would be mind-blowing for audiences today. 1001 Johnny says, and how much sex is depicted in television dramas these days? Bare breast bouncing aplenty. Adam Driver shot his kids all over a dame in HBO's Girls. Inverted nipples in Star's Warrior. There must be something else going on besides youngsters' disinterest. I don't know. I mean, again, I feel that the sex we are getting is a little infantilized, but I want to see it. To me, the erotic thriller, the craving, the desire. I mean, I think what I find very interesting is the way people talk today, especially the younger generation. It's almost as if they don't. I'm missing their joie de vivre. I'm missing their desire. Tell me who you are, by all means. You tell me your identity. You tell me what you want me to call you. I'll call you that. But where's that spark, man? Where's the spark of you going out into the world and seeing what happens? My friend Sean Fanning, he passed away more than 10 years ago. But my friend Sean Fanning and I, in the 90s in L.A., I could write seasons worth of series about multiple seasons of a show based on our adventures in L.A. But we had a saying, which was whatever comes our way. It didn't matter where we went, what was going on, we were going to make the most of it. If we went to a party that was lame, we were going to ignite that party. We were going to start that party and get that party rocking. Didn't matter where it was, didn't matter, and that philosophy took us a long way. And we had a lot of fun. And that was it, whatever comes our way. And, it's kind of the wherever you go, there you are. Buckaroo Banzai, whatever. Yeah. Marco says, my first erotic thriller was Boxing Elena. Good call. Good call. Jennifer Lynch, David Lynch's daughter. That was a famous story, what happened with that. But yeah, that's a good one. Nicomedes Santiago says, the French in cinema are still not afraid of sex, passion, grown-up messes, and ecstasies, and real bodies, and they let actresses age and still work and carry films. Yes, because as I like to say, Europeans have been human beings a lot longer than Americans have. So Europeans are much more comfortable with their own bodies than we are. We somehow are not. It's so strange. We want to pretend. I mean, everyone's always getting caught up and embroiled in sex scandals because we want to pretend that we don't do those things. Of course we do. It's very weird. It's a very weird thing. But anyway, I had a Star Wars letter I was going to read, but my voice, I've been sick, and I tested again positive for COVID. I've been positive for COVID for 8 days. So I'm going to end tonight's show. It was a long one. I want to thank you all for being here. It was a lot of fun. Thanks for listening. I want to thank my moderating staff. I want to thank Tom Jr. Jackson. Thank you guys for being here. I hope it wasn't too academic, but I thought it was fun to do. But yeah. And everyone else, thanks for supporting the channel via Super Chats and Tips. Thanks for becoming members. We will be having a member call this weekend, and I'm looking forward to it. So we shall do that. And on that note, every person you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear, and all you have to do is listen. And with that, I would say to all of you, have a better night.